What's up, guys? This is a quick little podcast here. On the Cultured Warrior podcast. It's a follow-up or expansion on an Instagram post I made titled Carnivore Diet Macronutrient Ratios. Again, so I've covered this topic before. I did get the question recently. So I just wanted to look at different sort of calorie intervals and macronutrient ratios and see where that gets us gram-wise as well as glucose-wise with different macronutrients. So this is the first picture here is the big one. Well, the big one as in it's got everything on it. You can see my little doodles here, my napkin art as I like to call it. So recently I was asked how much protein I eat per pound on a carnivore diet, and every now and then I'll get asked this about macronutrients. Most of you listening will know that that's carbohydrate, fat, and protein ratios. So I made a video on it a while ago, but it's always good to revisit these things, as hopefully my ideas around them are growing and changing. Or, if they're not, I'm just building more evidence to support staying in that belief or that model. So, I whipped these together, and what I really wanted to illustrate in the first four examples is the difference in grams of fat to protein and on a zero carb and carnivore diet at intervals of, say, 2,200 and 3,300 calories. Now, we'll get into why I picked those numbers in a second here. For the record, I usually eat a little over 3,000 calories per day, and occasionally have a real barn burner of well into the 4,000s during the summer, especially. Once in a while, not quite every week, I'll have a real heavy day where I'm. At least my Fitbit is telling me that I charge through 4,000 or 4,500 calories. That's a lot of food, by the way. And I have made posts on that, how you can't really fuel that in a healthy fashion on a vegan diet or without animal products. So, when I've talked about macronutrients before, I've quickly pointed out that while 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight and 1 gram of fat per pound of body weight is a good starting point. This is, Paul Saladino says this a lot about the fat to protein ratio. That 1 to 1 gram ratio gets you at about a 60-40 macronutrient, so percent calories ratio. By the way, just how the math works out, having 9 calories per gram of fat and 4 calories per gram of protein. That 1 to 1 gram gets you about 60-40 in terms of calories. However, if I did that in my weight at 170 pounds, then I would only be getting about 2,200 calories per day, and that's not nearly enough. Like I said, I'm not usually a little over 3,000 calories is kind of where I stay. So that's where I got to this 3,300 mark, and that was by bumping to 1.5 grams per pound of body weight for both fat and protein. And you can see in the doodles that I drew, I cover some kind of different intervals here. What happens when we have 1 gram per pound each, when we have 1.5 grams per pound of protein and 1 gram per pound of fat, etc., etc. By the way, a lot of folks in the keto space, not necessarily carnivore, a lot of people in the keto space will be worried about gluconeogenesis, which is what we're talking about here, getting carbohydrates or glucose from non-carbohydrate, or getting glucose from non-carbohydrate sources, i.e. the breakdown of protein. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute too. You don't really need to worry about that. Another interval for protein that's often talked about is 1 gram per kilogram of body weight. I don't think that's sufficient. Lots of other people, Anthony Gustin, Gabrielle Lyon, Rob Wolf. If you're in the ancestral health space at all, you should know who those people are. They're all in the 1 gram per pound plus range of things. So you can see from my doodles that when bumping those gram per pound ratios to 1.5, if the total intake is split into 2 meals, that is TOMAD, 2 meals a day, you're still consuming less protein per meal than OMAD. Why this is important is because, or then 2,200 calories per day at OMAD, 1 meal a day, Now, why this is important is because I pretty reliably have disastrous diarrhea if I consume a ton of protein. I don't know the exact grams, but a ton of protein in a single sitting, particularly after a long fast. So what I really wanted to get into is the carbohydrates here. So if you're ingesting a good whack of protein, by the way, it's going to come with fat in nature, typically. And that, for the record, is going to blunt a lot of the glucose that you would, or the blood glucose spike that you would get from, say, consuming the protein in an isolate, or consuming carbohydrates as an isolate. So, for the record, the range of the range of glucose that you get from 100 grams of protein is usually from 50 to 80. So I generally say 60, but you know that apparently there's a range. I got the reference here if you check the article on Medium. So what I did was I took some extreme examples here, or kind of like just playing with the numbers. So at 2,200 calories, at 10% carbohydrates and 40% protein, and then getting 0.8 grams of glucose per gram of protein, that gives us a total glucose load of 231 grams. In contrast, at 3,300 calories, 10% carbohydrates and 30% protein, so a little less protein by percentage here, we end up with 281 grams of glucose. So yes, there's about a 50 gram difference. There's a good whack there. It changes, but you can see we've increased the calories by 50%, right, from 2,200 to 3,300, and the glucose didn't go up nearly that much percentage-wise. So most of our glucose is coming from protein. And like I said before, though, we don't necessarily need to worry about this. I mean, I guess if you're really dialing in ketones, I would like to see those numbers. I would like to know what you're eating. I would like to know what protein you're eating that doesn't have fat in it, and what fat you're kind of like manipulating these ratios to kind of unnaturally, you know, beyond like a 70% fat, 30% protein. I found kind of hard to do without sort of like extracting some of these things out of it. So just eating a stick of butter doesn't count as real food. I mean, I love butter as much as anyone. I'm just saying it's not anymore. A stick of butter and then a whey protein shake is, I totally understand the convenience of supplements, but the point is, like, those aren't food. That's not a food that you pulled off an animal. I'm not saying it's inherently bad. I'm just saying it's getting away from the picture of how this food occurs in nature and how we would have consumed it. So I'm not saying it's bad or that we should never do it. I'm just trying to illustrate context here. So given what we've got, yeah, like I said, a 50% increase in calories and only a 20% increase in total glucose, I'd say these examples are pretty even, which is what I hypothesized before crunching the numbers. What does that mean? It means your body's going to get the glucose it needs one way or another. You're either going to give it to it exogenously, so from carbohydrate consumption, or make it and produce it endogenously from protein extra, air quote, extra protein consumption. So I think this is a fascinating addition to carnivore or carnivore-ish ways of eating, where someone may be incorporating fruits and honey into their diet as well. Again, I don't personally do that. I'm not opposed to it either. Where I think many folks get in trouble is with exogenous overdrive. Firstly, they're probably not prioritizing protein, something I've talked about already here. Secondly, perhaps they're inducing ketosis by chugging PUFAs. I haven't talked about that, but you definitely don't want to do that. Third, they're reassured by sports nutritionists for decades that they need carbohydrates, which isn't true. So they're loading up on pasta and bread for the past 10% that we calculated, 10% carbohydrates in the figures. Not ancestrally consistent, not ancestrally appropriate, not good food choices. All right? In the case of the latter overdrive, we're not getting the blunting effects from fat if you also subscribe to the narrative that athletes need to be on a high-carb, low-fat diet. Mainstream nutrition has let us down many times. Now, there may be something to be said for electrolyte balance with exogenous carbohydrates, though I haven't found that to be the case. It makes sense to me because geographically, when we get to more humid climates, so closer to the equator, that also tends to be where those fruits and honey occur in nature. So I'll do some testing in the future because I want to look at this more. I've experimented with fruit and honey. No real detriments, a little bit, but not really anything significant. No real benefits either. So I just found it easier to not consume them. But I do want to keep an open mind. I do want to keep testing these things. So hopefully that helped illustrate the point. I know it was a lot. All somebody asked was like, how much protein do I eat per gram of body weight? And I gave you this long-ass answer for it. So hopefully that clarifies things. Hopefully it makes you ask some other questions. So keep asking those questions. Send them to my DMs. And check the show notes for my sponsors and to get the references for this article. Thank you, as always, for listening. And I will catch you on the next episode.